For the last few months, I've been religiously playing Incision, one of my favorite throwback shooters to date. While the action, combat and level design are stellar and keep me coming back, it is the vibes, atmosphere and story that are even more unique. From the very start, we're already dealing with eldritch, godlike beings, cataclysms of meat filth, an inhuman protagonist, and hordes of grotesquely twisted monsters. Just in episode 1, we are trapped in a cocoon of flesh, traverse a decrepit factory and corrupted cityscape, along with descending into the maddening vestiges of a death cult, and fight their object of worship. If you're at all interested in the writings of Lovecraft, you owe it to yourself to check out this game. The actual events depicted in cutscenes and gameplay can be cryptic, but there's scraps of context scattered throughout, level transition screens, so-called lore bits, affixed to points in space of high importance, and bestiary descriptions. Especially later on in the game, there's a lot of strange events that didn't make sense upon a first playthrough, and have been stewing inside my head this entire time, trying to make sense of them. This is why I'm making this video, to go over every bit of story the game has to offer, and try to piece everything into a cohesive whole. I was originally going to be making this as one video, but the script has grown into a huge monster, so I think I will tackle just episode 1 for now. Let's now get to an obnoxiously thorough analysis that I probably spent way more thought into than the creator themselves. Episode 1 starts with a cutscene in which two humans in hazmat suits are running away from this grotesque and evil-looking entity. We will quickly find out that one of them is the player character, and the big alien-looking creature is called the Grafting Throne. A sea of blood starts to rise, and a hand emerges to grab and pull the other human in. Soon, the throne takes hold of the protagonist and stabs his face with a tentacle. It's important to note they aren't killed, but start a transformation. This metallic-looking mesh appears in the hole before slowly forming into the metal mask and glowing eyes that we will get quite familiar with. For a second, the screen flashes black and the words "kill me" can be seen. At first viewing, it sounds like this is the protagonist wanting to die because they are in agony, but I will later explain what this really represents. On top of that, a bone-like blade grows out of their forearm and falls off. We cut forward in time and see the player character cutting open and studying some living organism before being interrupted by a commotion upstairs. Soldiers have come to kill or eliminate the protagonist, and they look hesitantly out the window before getting ready for combat. So, what exactly is going on here? The Grafting Throne will be the primary antagonist of the game, and it's capable of manipulating and controlling the sea of flesh that rose up in response to the presence of the two humans. This growth consumes, adapts, and builds organic constructs, like some Lovecraftian god. Let's read part of the bestiary description for the protagonist, who is called Healer in this menu. Only part, as I'd like to cover this story in vaguely chronological order, so we'll come back to it later. Military scientist, former archaeologist, and war veteran, loner, enjoyer of guns, and a man of bad temper, he was called to examine the newly found ruins of the old cult underneath her home city, with a small team of various famous experts on the matter. For reasons unknown to all, the Grafting Throne, and who resided within it, used his body in the process of rebranding to create a superhuman killing machine. A blade grew out from the bone of his forearm, an object of mystery and obsession. This paragraph explains what the characters were doing in the first cutscene. Note that the text says, "the Grafting Throne" and who resided within it. We'll come back to that later. In the cutscene, we also see that Healer attached the bone blade to the spear saw weapon, which shows that he does hold it to some importance. He spent 6 months studying the monsters and learning everything he can about the growth and the cult, and eventually set off to fulfill his mission, telling himself it was simply for the good of humanity. His new form was twisted yet sturdy, disgusting yet perfect for his mission. He would never tire, never feel fear, hunger, nor thirst, and he was allowed to keep his mind and memories to use as fuel for his campaign. An otherworldly energy enveloped his internal structure, glowing out of his eyes, a pale light echoing that which made him. I don't think I need to add anything there. The protagonist's goal becomes to kill the throne and save Earth. Also, as you've probably noticed, there's a fair bit of typos, and other mistakes among the written text of this game. I'm not going to criticize anyone for it, because I suspect it was all written by the one person who made the entire game, someone going by the alias SmoothBrainDev. I'm going to be ignoring them, but also haven't fixed any of them in my script. Each level is preceded by a screen with an image depicting the level title and a short text passage. These passages are quite inconsistent, so I'm not sure how exactly to treat them. Some of them are in third person, some of them talk at you, and some of them are in first person. I'm going to be assuming everything in third person is absolute truth. E1M1 is called Hole in the Sky, and the description reads as follows. A lone building within a cocoon of flesh, a prison for its last inhabitant. One man struggles with the last remaining scraps of his humanity, dissecting the growth's creations to understand his own body and his foes. As if beckoned, he prepares for a journey back to where he became something other than human. I see two important information here. The first is that healer is not human. The other one is how a cocoon is a place where metamorphosis takes place, and that's not necessarily that of the protagonist, but we'll come back to this a lot later. The level picks up where the cutscene left off, inside the apartment, where healer has taken shelter for 6 months. There are these glowing fissures, especially around the first level, which, when interacted with, tell us something. These are usually mechanical tutorial messages, but it's these little shimmering orbs that are more interesting here. The game calls them lore bits, and we get another message when we examine one for a couple of seconds. Examining the barred window says, "It's been 6 months since the relocation. 6 months of watching it all change. I'm leaving today." Nothing really new here, so let's keep moving. We see several expired specimens nailed to operating tables, which we'll later find out are actually enemies we fight in the game. A Firstborn, Clinker, Maw, and Terminator, and this boiler-looking thing is a part of a conservator. Our body is capable of double jumping, and the way this tip is written makes it sound like this is a new ability granted to us by the throne. In this room, there is a whiteboard where Healer was taking notes on his findings. Not alive, no mercy. It replaces everything. Not real steel, organic fabrication. Hearing voices, not hungry. Blade cuts it perfectly. Can't use their guns, guns biolocked. Stay sane, damn it. These messages show us what exactly the protagonist's loss of humanity means. The growth is capable of perfecting his organism, but this also tethers him to the will of the grafting throne, presumably, and removes some agency and sanity. There's also a lore bit here saying, all of it is made from a single material. I can't make heads or tails from it. It is a master of imitation, an alchemic miracle. The term alchemic miracle here will be quite important, much later, but even without this context, it has some meaning. The word used here was specifically alchemical. Not chemical, not biological, not physical. It was alchemical. This word has connotations of not being a hard science, but something more spiritual and occult. To me, this signifies the growth, and the throne are not just science fiction-y biological organisms, but something more sinister and eldritch. Furthermore, this talk, all of it is made from a single material, I initially took that everything around us in the game is made of the growth, but I now don't think this is the case. We don't really know this at this point, but so far only one city has been corrupted. My first impression was that all we see is all there is on Earth, but actually the Earth has not been consumed. Therefore, I now think only the rusty constructs and fortresses are made of the growth, while the more normal-looking ruined buildings are just that, ruined buildings from before the cataclysm. Besides, we also see other structures that were built by human hand, clearly from a long time ago as well. Hey everyone, this is me editing the video, and I somehow forgot to talk about the tally marks. Each of these tallies has 8 strokes on it for some reason, and there's 20 of them. 20 times 8 is 160, which is a bit more than 5 months. If each stroke is 1 day, which it tends to be in media, which is a bit short of 6 months, it could also be a kill count, it could be whatever, right? I just thought I'd mention that. The blockaded door is blown open by a squad of Firstborn, releasing us from the safe haven Healer has made for himself. These monsters look like basic futuristic grunts with cybernetic elements and wielding a laser weapon. Their bestiary description reads: the first responder military forces, those among the first to fall victim to Growth's rapid infestation, became the blueprint for Growth's army. The body is collected, and a mesh of rust-like cocoon manifesting from the particles in the atmosphere. It soon envelops the melting carcass, rapidly forming them into a mindless and weaponized drone for the ever-growing army of flesh and steel. They wield the Growth-born replications of a laser rifle and combat armor, but their mass-produced and sluggish bodies make them a threat only in large numbers. This description I find quite enlightening. It tells us that Growth doesn't just infect and corrupt things by physical contact, there's an airborne agent to it. The next level is actually where we see bodies and organic matter being processed and burned, polluting the atmosphere with said agent. The material to reconstruct the Rustborn from a dead body comes from the air itself. Just down the corridor, we meet the Sycophant, a juggernaut-looking melee brute. Many of the fortunate ones who weren't swallowed by the Growth went mad from the sight of living flesh and melting bodies in the toxic atmosphere. Seeking salvation, they began to worship Growth as their god. They were gifted an organ to replicate saw blades and armor to survive in the hostile atmosphere, so they may collect more survivors and intact bodies to be broken down and reassembled. The most interesting thing to me about this description is that these enemies aren't actually Growth-born. They're basically normal humans with equipment made from Growth. The story beats we've discussed so far are very reminiscent of stories by Lovecraft, an ancient cult towards some strange paranormal entity, unearthing said dormant entity, making its powers run rampant, an all-consuming and assimilating faceless and formless threat in the form of Growth. It's worth noting that neither the throne nor Growth itself are gods, so in this way the story charts its own course, but we'll learn more of that later. We fight our way through the apartment complex, most of it infested with Growth. Some electric-looking devices down there allow us to open the door to freedom. These too are Growth-born and serve some incomprehensible purpose beyond us. We can step outside the building and an ambush force jumps out of these metal container-looking things. We face another new enemy here, the Pustule. They are stationary turrets that kind of just look like a head growing out of the ceiling and spitting out fast explosive nails. Pieces of weaponized Growth, attached to hard surfaces, acting as a defense system for all Growth-influenced structures. As is the case with almost all of Growth, its vaguely human-like visage has been combined with modified man-made weaponry. These abominations fire rods of superheated steel that explode soon after hitting their target. It seems that all living constructs of Growth seem to take some, sometimes vaguely humanoid form, yet the source of their aberrant form doesn't seem to always come from humans. This description isn't interesting in the grand scheme of things, beyond suggesting this monster imitates the form of some non-human organism, and we will see several such beings later on. Outside, we can see several different structures and machines. Particularly of note is this spire sparkling with orange energy. I don't know if it does anything particular, it's just a visual motif we will see repeated in many Growth-controlled structures. One of the first power-ups can be picked up here, this orange orb of energy, which gives us a lot of health and increases our melee damage until the end of the level. This will actually be somewhat relevant later on. A further room holds these coffin-looking containers with unfinished Rustborn and a lore bit. The steel grows on their flesh, wires meet their nerves, eventually resurrecting the body with none of their mind left intact. We get to witness here a vertical slice of the process mentioned earlier, how Growth takes material from the atmosphere itself to create new bodies for the war machine. There's also this big, rotating sphere. I don't think it's important, I just thought it looked cool. Clinkers are our next adversary, fast and small little spider-like amalgamations of flesh and steel. Reanimated bodies which represent the Growth's army's attack dogs. Within their opened chest cavities hides a 3-barreled nail cannon, which they use to slow down the last survivors, so they may devour their bodies and turn their flesh into even more nails. Curious contraptions impossible to make heads or tails of. This description is an early sign to something, which will become much clearer later on. Growth itself doesn't have any grand or intelligent goal beyond just consuming, learning, and growing stronger. The Clinkers kill things for no other reason than being able to kill more things. This is not that dissimilar from how, biologically speaking, the only purpose of life on Earth is to survive, generate offspring, and evolve. After this dark room, we use a strangely constructed fire escape to get back into the complex. We keep climbing to eventually reach the rooftop. Now we clearly see this SOS message on the side of the building. The tutorial message here is telling us to cut this disgusting pulsating tumor, more on those later. This causes a big bridge to lower across the chasm. Like the whiteboard message said, blade cuts it perfectly. The blade being the one on the spear saw. On the other side, we navigate through some more industrial and abstract tunnels before reaching the end of the level. This is represented by a face growing out of the actual wall, on a similar mesh as that we've seen on our protagonist, with the text Sector Lockdown. I have a lot to say about this, but we'll get back to this later, when we have more information. The next level is E2M1, Rust Organs. Most of the city's former inhabitants were gathered towards the Great Walls of Rust. Their bodies melt into the atmosphere, becoming one with their putrid grave. From its barren corridors, dark shadows and countless holding cages, the beasts toil endlessly to pursue their one true goal, to gather more victims so their numbers may grow ever more, to spread their rust organs throughout the entire planet. This is the level taking place in one of the factories, which convert dead bodies into the airborne growth agent, which then lets it construct new troops and more factories, or organs. It looks like a properly decrepit industrial building, straight out of Quake 2, but it's constructed entirely of growth. Near the start, one of the secrets is in a little hole, surrounded by dead bodies, with a clinker inside. I think this little hole is the den of said enemy, and there's a few more narrow little side passages where clinkers attack too. We also start seeing these barrels full of gore and viscera, which I don't think have any grander purpose beyond just being a container of materials, not unlike oil barrels for humans. In the next room, there is a lore bit on a mass of flesh connected to something with a cable. Living tissue turned into a network of information banks. My every step, every breath, every empty casing left behind is being tracked. This is the first time we get a sign that growth is observing healer and is capable of analyzing and learning from data. Scattered throughout the facility are these little devices, and in this room, healing stims are placed on top of them. Therefore, I suspect these machines fabricate said stims, which implies, in turn, that whatever these healing items are made of is growth derived. I don't think this is much of a surprise. The color of the red matter inside is quite reminiscent of growth. A force field is blocking the path forward, so we take a detour down this blood-lined corridor where the blood-addled attack us for the first time. A vicious combination of never-ending thirst and sense-enhancing biomodifications. They prowl the desolate streets to fill their great syringes with the blood of the victims, siphoning it directly into their system. This serves to only increase their thirst, and their glutton numbs their sense of pain. They have been observed to reanimate after apparent death. Reason for this is most likely the biomechanical parasite attached to their spinal column. I'm struggling to understand what these beings are, or what their purpose is. My best guess is that they work as gatherers, or cleaners of blood specifically. That final passage is totally true. These enemies will get back up to attack you after dying once. You can prevent this by jibbing or otherwise dismembering them. In this little secret hole, there is a purple power-up called the Carnage Accelerator, which increases your attack rate. I don't think this one has any lore relevance. The next room of significance has several devices, seemingly powered by this yellow energy. A corpse looks like it's burning, or as if something is being siphoned out of it. A lore bit on it says, "The thing above must be cut. The minds sealed within the cocoon are part of the growth's nervous system that keeps this machine hell functioning." Upstairs, right above the body, is the tumor spoken of, and cutting it shows the message, "Machine tumor incised. Force fields offline." This is the only tumor in the game I can remember, which has a corpse associated with it. All the other ones are just alone. Therefore, I think what we saw here was the process of trapping a human's mind inside of the tumor, for it to work as part of the automatic nervous system. When we return back downstairs, we see the yellow effects are gone, but the lore bit doesn't change. As we go back down the bloody corridor, these little cells have opened. Inside are some sad beings called Incompatible. Shambling victims of growth experiments. They seem to have some scraps of their past life intact, as they still react with emotion to stimuli such as pain and sight. Pieces of unfinished metallic armor has grown onto their body, and their organs have been partially replaced with tubes and wiring. They travel often in pairs, preferring another's company. The few old surviving scriptures of the old cult mention a holy process of healing, making two things into one, possibly alluding to the grafting throne's ability to combine things into a new form. Maybe these poor subjects are still seeking the grafting throne to be reborn. A lore bit in the air between a pair of them reads, "Incompatible and lost, born as failures, spat out by the flesh, easy prey for the nail spitters," those being the clinkers. Most of them seem to wander in pairs. The last sentence there makes reference to that ancient occult scripture of making two things into one. These Incompatible are failed attempts at building something. A soldier, a worker, or anything in between. I don't think they have much lore significance. They appear rarely, kind of as set dressing. If anything, they seem to represent the remnants of the ancient cult, or just helpless but faithful servants. The rest of the level has us traverse some more industrial machinery. Crushers, furnace, you get the gist. The final room holds another tumor, but this one looks different. The color is darker, and it even has a screen on it. I think this is supposed to be a command center for the entire factory, probably a main control panel of sorts. This is why cutting it triggers an alarm, and waves of enemies spring an ambush. The final one involves two Terminators. An unfortunate case of growth's attempts at creating a bipedal tank. Their bodies are full of solidified unknown substance, which gives them a subdermal bulletproof armor and houses a hefty payload of warheads. Their skulls have been kept intact and well visible for the opposition, possibly for demoralization purposes, but true demoralization is felt when facing their rear end. Nothing to add here. They sure have a gyat, if you know what I mean. The next three levels are pretty light on story. Feral Armament takes place deeper down the facility. Furnace for the failures and rejects. Their bodies are burned, absorbed back into the atmosphere. Distant voices of something loud and fierce are echoing in the walls. You feel even less welcome than before. This is a very short level in which we encounter a new enemy, the Maw. A combination of an experimental plasma-based military armament and performance-enhancing exoskeleton. The body in the middle is used as a sort of processing unit and a container for the cannon's unstable ammunition. Their legs are heavy and clumsy, but give them an ability to use rocket boosters to slide around their opponent to keep them on their toes. This is a creature which almost seems more mechanical than it is organic. The meat feels unnecessary and vestigial. When we reach the main furnace of this facility, a huge new foe leaps down for a boss fight. The titular Feral Armament's description says, "As seen with the Incompatibles and on the Blood-Addled, few of Growth's creations seem to stay sentient on some level. Whatever this massive specimen was meant to become after this full transfiguration is left a mystery. It seems to know nothing but rage and hatred for the healer, and Growth fails to contain him. leaving him to rampage through the rust organs, looking for his nemesis. Growth's hive mind conveys objectives to its creatures, and this one seems to have been given the simple task of dispatching Healer, the one who does not belong among the Rustborn kin. He does not go down easily. That sure was a lot of words to say very little. This asshole hates you specifically and nothing else is known about him. He sure is ugly and wields a lot of armaments. Once we're done with him, an exit opens up, but we're not out of the woods yet. Blood Totems is up next. A great tower of blood and bone has risen out from the transformed city block, although it doesn't seem alive. Very little of the city remains as is, and almost everything has been transformed to become part of the growth's rust organs. My goal lies deep, deep underground. There is not a single lore bit in this entire level. We start out still in the factory, fight our way through some more hallways and rooms, which seem pretty similar to what we've seen so far. Cutting another TV tumor breaks the floor from underneath us, and we're let into the city proper. Like the text prelude says, a lot of it is taken over by both growth and the rust organs, which makes parts of the level feel quite similar to the previous ones. That being said, after fighting through some alleyways and warehouses, we drop down into a flesh pit. This shows us how growth has some use for the architecture and infrastructure of the city, but replaces things it doesn't need, like the earth itself. Down here, we can find Kitty, laying on top of a bigger Kitty. This thing is a weapon, but also a little fish-like organism, and these two specimens are the only two in the entire game. The pickup message says, "I shall call her Kitty," implying Healer picked her up with intent to domesticate this creature, and the next message says, "Kitty feeds on fresh blood. Jib enemies and shower in their blood to feed your new pet." Double exclamation mark, which has even more unnerving connotations. That being said, indeed, jibbing enemies leaves behind this red residue, which can be collected as ammo, because it is a weapon and even has its own bestiary description. A species of a completely unknown origin, it seems to have been born from growth, just like its other monsters, but no signs of mechanical constructs or weaponry is found in its body. It is a sentient, thinking, hard-willed creature, with a mannerism of a large stubby-legged cat. Two of its kind have been observed, Kitty being the only survivor of the pair, and she seems to be still half-grown compared to her mother. Kitty feeds mainly on freshly extracted blood, preferring to absorb blood particles from the air for sustenance and self-defense purposes. Its ability to crystallize the blood into many different forms baffles all scientific understanding. Kitty is extremely defensive of her owner and spits extremely volatile blood crystals at any possible threat, yet her even more baffling ability is to spit something resembling a lightweight saw blade, which she can steer towards opposition with her mind or some other unknown and invisible force she may possess. I'm not going to dwell on this too much because this description makes it very clear this character isn't something meant to be taken too seriously. It's just a fun weapon with a fun design and fun interactions, and doesn't have much lore implications or relevance. There's nothing in the game that suggests there's anything more to her. Fighting further down this flesh pit, growth is taking new forms. The environment starts looking not just like a scary, all-consuming organism, but also some kind of new ecosystem, with these little spuds or flowers, vine-like organic structures, and even random little rustborn machines. To climb out, we will have to navigate these jump pads, and there are figures looming over us. They look like sculptures, but they're clearly growth-born creations. They look similar to another character we'll encounter later, suggesting to me growth is reusing a similar template. These two we see here are half-grown, unfinished, or maybe even failed beings, as they're incapable of doing anything. We now reach the area with the spire from the intro text. If this really is a totem, I doubt its existence has any utilitarian purpose. Totems are objects of religious and cultural significance, not tools or appliances for anything. The description of the Terminator enemy makes it clear growth understands psychological warfare, so maybe this is another way of inflicting fear on unturned humans. Or maybe the structure is simply how growth has reached the surface. I wish I had more to say about this level, but most of it is just going around these random and unremarkable or growth-created corridors and rooms. At the top of our ascent in this section is a button, which topples one of the buildings, revealing this very odd hole. A hidden path was uncovered at the base of the crumbled building, says the message. A few more enemies to dispatch along with some incompatible, and the level ends. I know this might seem like a strange thing to be drawing attention to, but I was wondering why there are green lights around this hole, which is a rare visual accent in this game. They are also present on jump pads, and this suggests to me this isn't very important. Jump pads in games usually are just jump pads. There is no wider context or information. But if I had to speculate, the green presence in a certain location we'll get to later suggests they are the result of otherworldly technology, stemming from the grafting throne. This outlet for growth has been covered up by building over it, hopefully sealing it away to never escape. The Filth Pit is the next level. The earth has been hollowed out, housing a newly formed structure, a heavily fortified checkpoint between here and the research site. The sea of flesh spawns toxin into the air, and the filth seeps out of the false steel of its structures. The rust organ spits its molten steel into the vast caverns of filth, and the hot air stinks through my metallic chassis. Make haste, their numbers are growing rapidly. This level is not a natural cavern. It was opened and hollowed out by growth and its spawn, and it itself is organic. The walls are not rock, they are flesh or fake rust. The structure inside is not a roadblock or a blockade or a barricade. It is a checkpoint. A checkpoint is a location that restricts travel and movement, but doesn't prevent it entirely. Instead, everything or everyone moving through it is meant to be controlled somehow. That being said, I struggle to see how any of this is a checkpoint. It is far too intricate and winding. And where exactly is the movement supposed to be taking place? We get through the level by use of a ventilation duct. The artificial constructs feel like part of the rust organ, just settled in a different environment. A lower bit on this pipe tells us some sort of respiratory system. There is a faint sound of wind moving in the pipes, a rare blessing of having no human lungs anymore. This, combined with the description of how the airborne growth agent is being pumped into this area and how molten metal is spilling into parts of it, suggests to me this level is either the ground of intense terraformation by growth or a spawning grounds, or both. The checkpoint takes form of the hostile environment and monsters themselves that a human with normal human lungs would be unable to pass through. This is why the description drew attention to their numbers. Conversely, the spawn of growth is able to leave to ravage the outside, while letting incompatibles back in to seek the throne. The first part of the level involves us ascending the structure and pressing a button to reveal the ventilation duct. The second part is this winding slog of abstract corridors and rooms that blends together in my brain. This is probably one of my least favorite parts of the game. I always forget how long and monotonous it is. It looks like part of E1M2, but with a green haze this time. This is where we will first notice this strange mechanism. It looks like an otherworldly clock, and my best guess as to what this is an internal clock for the machinations of growth as a whole. The level ends by, you guessed it, cutting another face. E1M5 is up next, Nerve End. A recently discovered ancient burial site, many incomprehensible discoveries made here. The Hollow Earth led us deep into its core where we discovered their object of worship. Now they have sealed my way downwards with their hideous technology. I must cut them down, every single one, and then fulfill my mission. A nerve end is the part of a nerve connected to cells or other nerves, sending information forward. My first instinct was that this name is referring to how we must cut through tumors to unlock the big lift and take it down in this level, and I think that is the most likely interpretation. We start in a rust organ-esque arena, which feels like an extension of the previous level. Opening the gate, We emerge into another huge cave, this one seeming more natural. The lift is surrounded by statues of robed figures, which we will be seeing a lot more of, and also incompatible, seemingly left stuck and stranded. A lore bit on this old card says, last remaining records of visitors to these grounds were from 1700s. Victims of plague following an old rumor in hopes of a divine cure. This puts an upper limit on how far back the titular cult from the death cult Vestiges episode name was created. Given that these people were following rumors, I would suspect the actual cult came even earlier than that. Why does Healer know this? Because they were one of the archaeologists who traversed and investigated this site and walked this road before. This description also draws parallels to this repeating theme in Lovecraft-inspired works, in which ancient and terrible knowledge is discovered about some hidden occult mechanism humanity has no sense of now. If you've been following my channel, you know I'm a big fan of Lovecraft's contributions to literature and culture in general. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a fan of his work, because reading them today, many of them feel kind of like pastiches of cosmic horror, and I have yet to read one that truly scared me. However, there is something that speaks to me about the various concepts and themes originating from his twisted mind, about humanity's encounters with something truly unknown. And when I say unknown, I'm not talking about how in modern sci-fi films and shows you have aliens that speak a foreign language and have a different culture. I mean entities properly enigmatic and incomprehensible. Godlike beings existing in many more dimensions than just 3 or 4, whose true forms are imperceptible to humans. Paranormal forces of such power and sentience that our race are mere ants to them. All-consuming, assimilating, and grotesque creatures that would easily conquer the entire world. This story has a ton of beats inspired by Lovecraft's stories. The unearthing of ancient knowledge, a corrupting biological and omnipresent force that transforms everything it can into its own twisted vision of reality. A dark cult dedicated to said force, hoping to buy itself into its good graces, and a truly otherworldly being of unimaginable power in the grafting throne that can't even be communicated or reasoned with. If we look up, a mass of flesh and eyes is an intake for 2 nerve-like cables. The hint tells us the nerves keep this elevator from moving. Find and cut down their source. Following one of them leads us to this large burial site with plenty of tombs and gravestones. I doubt the people being buried here knew exactly what they were getting into. I suspect they just had vague notions of being divinely saved or reborn, and it was the cult who knew more of the specifics, which I'm sure some of those coming here were indoctrinated into. One of the tombs is opened with a lever and has a gravestone inside saying, "Here lies Caleb, may he live again." In case you don't know, this is a reference to the game Blood.
I live again.
Following this path around the cave, we reach the upper level and encounter this new enemy, the Conservator. The growth devours, learns, improves, imitates. These specimens seem to wear imitations of the garbs of the forgotten cult, worshippers of the grafting throne, which became the ground zero for Growth's invasion. If Growth has any sense of hierarchy among its ranks, these ones must be their high-ranking officers. Their bodies move slowly, but they compensate with a weapon that fires bursts of homing disc-like explosives. Note to anyone reading, kill it with fire. This description doesn't give us much backstory on anything. The most interesting insight is that this robe they're wearing looks like that of the cultists. We also see this theme of absorption and imitation, which will be quite important later. This monster reminds me so much of the Vors from Quake. They're both combinations of a spider-like lower body and humanoid upper body, and they both attack using homing projectiles. The first nerve end is the organic tumor situated amidst another eye-filled flesh pit. I think these eyes represent a sort of nervous activity. They are quite complex organs, and being observed by an eye makes our monkey brain feel like they are being perceived by some sentience as well. Therefore, I feel like this is a nexus of cognitive ability. Again, the growth learns and imitates. When the tumor is cut, the hint literally tells us nerve cluster incised, one more to go. The second lane takes us through more Rust Organ-esque environments, before forcing us to trudge down this blood-filled sewer. The tumor, this time, is the TV variant, and I'm starting to think that these two flavors represent the two sides of growth's creations, biological and technological. That's not quite always adhered to. For example, in the Rust Organs, is this organic tumor, though it seems like it's just been made, so who knows. Once we get back to the main lift, it automatically starts descending and taking us into a huge open chamber, again surrounded by this malformed being hanging from the side of the wall, which actually reminds me a lot of the Gatherers from Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Some incompatible have made their way here through unknown means, and the level ends. We are now deep into the lair of the beast, and all that's standing between us and the finale is the grounds of the death cult Vestiges themselves. Despite being the ground zero of Growth's awakening, this place has been left almost untouched by its putrid influence. I hear rumbling all around resonating from even deeper underground. The sacrificial well is ahead, where we once climbed down together. They never expected me to get this far. This level starts off by us leaving the cave and entering the ruins of the cult grounds. One asset quite common to this area is this mass of flesh, consuming several coffins. A nearby lore bit on a grave tells us what is happening. Many perished, waiting for their turn to be welcomed by the throne. They now lie here along with their sworn companions, to eventually become roots to a new world. It seems that these pilgrims, let's say, saw being consumed by the throne as a divine act, and probably the ultimate goal of their religion was to bring about a rapture-esque world-changing event of the throne taking over all of Earth. And if they couldn't become part of the initial burst, at least they would become fodder for further stages of the plan. This level feels kind of like an unholy cathedral type of environment, with burial grounds, fortifications, gates, places of worship, communion, mass and study. There's a secret behind a weakened wall here, which leads into a crypt of sorts with two tiny skeletons and a lore bit. The dead were carried into the catacombs in a desperate attempt to arouse that which made two things into one. This further supports my view of how the cult seemed to operate, and is probably one of the most grim secrets in the game. Breaking the wall also reveals a clinker, which might have some significance to this location, but I'm not really sure what, beyond being the thing that came to eat the corpses. Or maybe it's what the corpses turned into, which is even darker to think about. Several times, the cathedral architecture forces us to negotiate the cavernous catacombs with tight and oppressive geometry. At one point, we erect a stone monument and ride it to the top ramparts, which one could see as the dead metaphorically rising us up to progress. Flipping this lever unlocks a previously hidden inner sanctum location, where scholars partook in recording and absorbing knowledge. One of the open manuscripts reads, "The throne which came from heaven above, chariot of a repentant God, granted the holy men most wondrous new form, healed many, sick or dead, sleeps now." It would appear that the antagonist of this episode has paused its work at some point during the cult's operations, created something, and then fell into a long slumber. The way forward is blocked by another huge gate, so we blast and slice our way through more unholy chambers. A lone incompatible seems unable to flip the next lever, which reveals this gigantic cave filled with more failed experiments. A second feral armament ambushes us here, possibly the source of the rumbling mentioned in the text prelude, as the first one also was foreshadowed in a similar manner. Slaying the beast grants us access to the Well of Sacrifices. Dropping down, we immediately notice something is off. Whatever plummets down the well falls into this strangely colored and pulsating liquid, which actually builds up some kind of status effect on us. Falling further down, we find ourselves in a very natural cave, in which is another very primitive burial site, and these alien-looking sculptures. Flipping a lever to progress actually makes them spring limbs and start attacking us. These are some of my favorite designs in the game, because the combination of a stone sculpture and the organic-looking elements make them look so eldritch and otherworldly. we're actually going to skip the description for now, because it contains a lot of elements that will be very confusing and unclear at this point in the story. Getting hit by their projectiles builds up the same status effect, which is essentially blood loss from Dark Souls / Elden Ring. One last obstacle before the final level, one more gate. One more frantic ambush by stone men and conservators signaled by this blood-curdling scream. I actually didn't notice that as I was playing, but there's another gatherer figure in the back here, which will make another being look very familiar very soon. A second scream signals the gate is fully open, letting us pass through and end the level for the first time without cutting a face. The final level of the episode is called Throne Firstborn. The atmosphere here is heavy and burning, almost no oxygen left. Long wails of some godless creature echo as I step through the great gates. Forgotten praises and promises of ascension and God's birth carved on great slabs. The grafting throne is just ahead. Whatever the throne had spawned, I must kill it. Then I shall cut down the throne itself for good. This level is just a boss fight, but there's still a lot of valuable lore in the start. The final crypt, before the big bad, has some stone tablets carved with text. One lore bit says, "The grafting throne awaits ahead. Surrender yourself to its embrace and be reborn. Your pilgrimage is over." The second, "Flesh of two will be made into one. All impurities extracted from your body and soul, fed to the throne's firstborn, visage of the coming new world." The third and final, and possibly most important one. "The devils walk these grounds. They seek to take the throne from you. The firstborn protects us. He is the flesh that takes all." I will refrain from interpreting these for now, because a lot is about to happen, and we can tie up a lot of things at once. As we step forward into a grand darkness, the throne's firstborn is revealed to us, a body that literally looks like flesh of two made into one, and the throne subtly visible behind it. The monster itself doesn't do anything, instead it is these 4 stationary turrets doing most of the fighting, which actually kind of look like robed cultists to me, but I could be tripping. When they go down, the firstborn falls over, exposing its brain that can only be damaged by the blade on our spear saw. When enough damage is dealt, the firstborn recoils, the turrets rise up again, and this whole process must be repeated 2 more times. This is the figure I believe the Gatherer creations take the form of, visage of the coming new world, after all. When we're done, the second cinematic plays out. Healer steps over the carcass of the creature and prepares to destroy the throne. There is yet another burial site, right at its foot, but a flash stops us. 3 figures stand between us and the target, none of them looking like any growth-born monsters we've seen so far. Drawing a gun, the protagonist is stopped by the bellow of the mighty bell, wielded by the biggest of the lot, and falls down to their knees. Hey everyone, this is me editing the video again. I am interrupting the video again because I just noticed that you can actually see the throne disappearing in the next shot. This is quite important. I will not elaborate. Soon, a white sphere or explosion expands and envelops a large part of the city, before showing us glimpses of pyramids floating in the sky. We can also see a large mound of growth, which is probably the flesh cocoon we initiated the game in, however long ago this feels like by now. I know this is a lot to consider, but this is the end of episode 1, so let's start bringing this all together. Let's begin with the figures in the ending. I won't go into detail right now why this is clear, but they are a third, or I guess a 4th party, that is not aligned with neither the throne, growth, or the protagonist. I will be referring to them as the Malicant. I'm not going to go into detail right now as to what they are, as we'll learn a lot more about them in episode 2, so if you're interested in that, hit the subscribe button. They were the ones who planted the throne where it was, and maybe even created it. Whatever their goals are, the throne was doing what they wanted, so they can't have Healer cut it down. Let's work our way backwards, through the final 2 levels. I think some people, whom would later form the cult, witnessed the Malekith granting them the throne, and would worship it, since the manuscript earlier talks of how it was brought from the heavens. This could suggest they somehow communicated the powers of the throne to the would-be cultists, but even if they didn't, it makes sense why they would lay their dead to rest next to a divinity, and soon find out what the artifact was capable of. The throne would start forming its firstborn. As per the tablets, people pilgrimaged over to this location to become part of the creature, which they saw as a purifying and divine act. The cultists were aware of the Malekith. They are the devils, which technically own the throne. The purpose of the Firstborn was to protect the throne from them, and why that was, we shall find out later. The many sets of burial grounds we find as we approach the throne suggest to me that there were actually several cults built on top of each other, 2 at the very least. There's a clear distinction as we go down the Well of Sacrifices. The filth looks different and has different properties. The stone men feel unlike anything else we've seen so far, and we even have to contend with a new toxic affliction. Moreover, how was anyone supposed to pilgrimage down this drop? I think the cult at some point built the structure, and there was no talk of traveling to the throne anymore. This is just where they started dropping sacrifices. One of the tracks that plays in this level is even called Different Face, Same Faith, and I don't see how this could refer to anything but the cult taking different forms over time. The cult became less about the death and more about the worship. They built this cathedral and started keeping books. It was now necessary to take turns for people to be sacrificed. They've turned into a bureaucratic machine, possibly because the throne fell asleep, or so they believed. Word of the miracles performed here traveled far and wide, and eventually access to the cult itself was denied. And that's where the newcomers started being laid. What I find interesting about the cult is that they seem to have had no idea about growth. They talk of the throne, the Malekith, the Firstborn, and that seems to be the extent of it. No growth monsters, no rust organs, no flesh cocoons. They did believe the throne would somehow consume everything alive on Earth, but that could also just have meant we would all become part of the Firstborn. I think the robed figure depicting in the statues could be an ambassador Malekith that the cult believed was the divinity to have brought down the throne for them. Let's now start concluding things, because this is all I have to say about episode 1. To sum up the story so far, an unknown faction called the Malekith have brought down the grafting throne on Earth for unknown reasons so far. A cult forms around it and witnesses how the throne is capable of transforming several humans into one creature. They see this as a divine and purifying act, so they lay their dead there and dedicate places of worship to what they see as a chariot of the gods. For now, all the throne does is create a firstborn organism to protect itself from the Malekith in particular, for reasons we'll get to later. Pilgrims and sacrifices alike arrived to become part of the machine, but at some point the throne fell dormant. The cult eventually faded away, and the sands of time buried it deep underground. In modern times, archaeologists uncovered the sacred grounds, and one of them was the protagonist of the game. Their presence awakened the throne, and a hideous growth consuming everything and everyone, except for the player character, who got rebranded instead. They became a superhuman killing machine, and a special blade grew out of their bone. Growth quickly took over the entire city, and Healer became trapped in a flesh cocoon, where they spent 6 months studying themselves and the sick creations of Growth. They found Growth was a super material, capable of incredible imitation and impossible versatility. A strike team arrived at his doorstep, beckoning them to start their journey back down whence all of it came. He fights out his prison and enters the Rust Organs. This is a facility constructed entirely by and from Growth, which burns up bodies and emits an airborne agent into the atmosphere, which lets the Eldritch Horror construct more soldiers and terraform environments wherever the air can reach. The corrupted cityscape is up next, where one of a two-of-a-kind creature is adopted by Healer as a pet and weapon. Descending underground, a spawning zone is the first obstacle. and beyond that is the dig site and several flavors of cold ruins. Eventually, the protagonist reaches the heart of the corruption, cuts down the Firstborn protecting the throne, but is stopped by a squad of Malicant. And what happens later, we will only find out in episode 2. Thanks for watching.